Okay, hi everyone. I've been wanting to do this presentation for a little while, and I finally got myself an outline organized today. So I'm just going to go ahead and try this video and see how it goes. I've got my marker board behind me for a visual aid. That's kind of an experiment, so we're going to see how that works. But let's go ahead and get started. So this video is about anti-speciesism for social justice advocates. So this is going to be taking a social justice lens based on what social justice is, and then kind of talking about what speciesism is and why it's relevant for social justice advocates. So I thought that it would be useful to start off by defining social justice. So social justice has a lot of definitions. It's kind of one of those things that we throw around a lot, but it's kind of hard to define. But one of the definitions that I found that was good came from the National Association of Social Workers. And they said that social justice is the view that everyone deserves equal economic, political, and social rights and opportunities. And I think that's a pretty good definition. I do want to tweak just one thing about it. I want to change equal to equitable. To use our visual aid here, common thing that I hear about equal versus equitable is that equal is if you've got a wall and there are three people trying to see over the wall, but they're all different heights. So we've got this guy, this guy, and this guy. All right, so equal is giving them all the same size of box to stand on. So now they've all got boxes, and this guy still cannot see over the wall. Our second person can almost see over the wall. And our third person can see all the way over the wall. Now, if we were working on equity, we would give them all a box that could guarantee that they could see over the wall, even though those boxes are going to be different sizes, because they have different needs based on their heights. And now all three of them can see over the wall, even though they have different sizes of boxes. So that's kind of the difference between equality and equity. And I think that's an important thing to consider when we're trying to construct a definition of social justice. So let's go ahead and say social justice. We'll go ahead and say that it's equitable access to rights and opportunities for everybody. Okay, so now we have some more defining to do. We need to talk about who everyone is. I think a good place to start with that is to say that, well, everyone is all of the people in the society, because we're talking about a societal level. That's why it's social justice. But then we need to define a person. And a person in common language is kind of synonymous with human, but what it actually means is a morally and or legally relevant entity. So we have moral duties to a person. Like I said, person currently is kind of synonymous with human being, but it wasn't always that way. For example, at one point, children were not seen as persons. Slaves were not seen as persons. They were the property of the people who owned them. And women were not seen as persons at one point in time. But obviously, now we know that they are. So to kind of talk about who this everyone in social justice is, we need to talk about who a person is. And that's something that's actually surprisingly difficult to define. There's a lot of philosophical and political debate about what makes someone a person. But I'm going to try my best to do that here. So our first kind of question about what makes a person is, well, isn't a person just a human being? And I would say that, we could define it that way, and a lot of people do define it that way. But like I said about the human beings who at one point were not considered people, our definition of who is a person is constantly expanding. And calling someone a person simply because they're a human is kind of a dangerous claim to make, because all that really makes us human is our DNA. So arguing that someone is worth more or less morally based on their genetic code opens the door up for all kinds of problematic things that, we're working on and that we've been fighting on for a long time. Because the only difference between race, between sex, between ability status comes down to differences in genetic code. That's all it really is. And then the societal significance that we place on those differences in genetic code. So we know that it's wrong to define moral worth based on genetic code. So obviously we cannot define person based on genetic code. You can give it an X so that we know that that's not what we want to do. So I'm going to shift over here so that you can see a little better. So we can also try and say, okay, well, someone is a person based on whether or not they can reason. This ties into a lot of theories, such as the signing of a moral contract. You agree upon a set of rules, and then everyone in that society has to kind of play by those rules. But we know that this actually doesn't make sense. The ability to reason, the ability to use rational thought to make decisions is relevant when it comes to making moral decisions. It's relevant to know the difference between right and wrong, but it's not morally relevant when it comes to being affected by the moral decisions that others make. For example, if we have a human infant, that human infant doesn't know the difference between right and wrong, and they can't really use reason yet. But we know that it would be wrong to harm that infant. So, we know that because that infant, will still be affected by the moral or immoral decisions that someone makes regarding that infant. That's why it's wrong to, hurt or harm an infant. And, we could say, okay, but that infant will develop the ability to reason someday, which is true. However, if we have an example of a person with a developmental disability that prevents them from being able to go through life without a caretaker and prevents them from being able to, reason out, is it right for me to take this action or is it wrong for me to take this action? That individual is still a person. And it's still wrong for example, for their caretaker to abuse them, even though they can't necessarily use reason. And we know that that's wrong. They're still obviously a person. So to say that morality is based on reason is also inaccurate and dangerous because that opens the door for ableist arguments. All right, the next criteria we can look at that's commonly used to define, who's morally relevant and who's not is language. And as far as language goes, that's similar to the previous example. Some humans are not able to use language, but they still matter. They're still people. So that's a pretty quick and easy one to kind of see why we need to say that that's not a reason for determining moral worth. Language is another red X. Okay, and then the last kind of common criteria that I listed for what we tend to use to determine, who matters, who is a person, who's part of everyone, is intelligence. And when we talk about that, that puts us onto very shaky ground. I would argue that Stephen Hawking is far more intelligent than I am, probably far more intelligent than most of us. But that doesn't mean that his life matters more than mine. It doesn't mean that he should have more legal or social rights than I do. He shouldn't get 2 votes in an election while I only get 1 because he's smarter than me. So obviously we know that kind of falls apart too if we try and use intelligence. So the point that I think we need to come to here is that there are no morally relevant factors that can both include all humans in this kind of moral sphere and exclude all non-humans from the sphere of moral worth. And it's obvious that we need to include all humans in the sphere of moral worth. That's, kind of one of the core principles that social justice is based upon, is this equal rights and opportunities for everyone. And obviously that needs to include all humans. So what can we use as a moral basis? Well, the basis that includes all human beings, regardless of their age or their ability status or their race or their sex or any other factors that we know as social justice advocates are not a reason for anyone's life to matter less than anyone other's, is sentience. And so sentience we can define as the ability to perceive the world around you and perceive the effects it has on you. It's the ability to feel pain or pleasure or fear or happiness. Oops, sorry. Okay, there we go. I'm going to give sentience a green check mark. And then we're going to talk about why that's the best kind of basis for moral standing. So using sentience as a moral baseline includes all of the human beings that we consider morally relevant, unlike these other criteria that are usually used. This sentience reason gives a logical explanation for why it's wrong for someone to murder an infant, even though that infant can't, use reason, it's not as intelligent as other humans, and it can't use language to advocate for itself. That's why it's still wrong to kill an infant. However, using sentience as the moral baseline comes with some pretty major implications. The biggest one being that using sentience as a moral baseline includes non-human animals. So under the definition of person that we kind of reached together, non-human animals are clearly part of everyone, but they clearly aren't given equitable rights in our society. Which is to say, remembering that definition of equitable, giving them equitable rights doesn't mean giving them the right to vote, because that would be like giving a human infant the right to vote. They cannot reason out who or what they want to vote for and why. So it wouldn't make sense to do that. But, giving them the right to not be harmed, sure, that seems like it makes sense. So this clearly isn't the way that we act. I mean, people can go out and shoot geese on the weekends for fun. We take wild whales that are supposed to have hundreds of miles to swim in the open ocean, and we put them in a literal swimming pool at SeaWorld because we like watching them. We eat pigs because we like the way they taste. And so, obviously, our current treatment of animals is not in line with this kind of idea of social justice, where we have equitable rights and opportunities for everyone. And that's what's meant by speciesism. Speciesism is when we arbitrarily elevate the rights of some individuals in our society over others based on species. And like we've demonstrated, that's not logically sound, and it's not okay, because it ends up harming a lot of those members of our society. So I'm going to write the definition of speciesism up here really quick. Oops. If I can spell. Sorry. We're going to try this again. Speciesism is elevating some members of a society over others based on species. And we've already talked about why that's an arbitrary reason for elevating the worth of some members of society over others, because that's based on genetic code. And we already talked about how flawed that argument is and how dangerous it is. So this is kind of why speciesism is a social justice issue, because if speciesism reinforces this genetic code thing and we are okay with that, we allow that to continue, then everything that social justice is based on, this kind of core principle, falls apart. And that's why we all need to become anti-speciesists. It's why social justice advocates need to lead the charge in anti-speciesism, because this is a social justice issue. We need to start getting out there and saying that it's wrong to shoot geese on the weekends because some people think it's fun. And it's wrong to eat bacon because we like the way pigs taste. And it's wrong to put whales in a literal swimming pool at SeaWorld because we like watching them. That's not okay to do, and the thing that makes us think it's okay to do is speciesism. And yeah, that can be a really uncomfortable thing to come to terms with, especially if we know that we have been participating in the oppression of non-human animals. Um, I know that when I came to terms with that, it was an uncomfortable thing for me, but that's something that we as social justice advocates know how to do, and it's something we're good at. We know how to say, oh, wow, I've been participating in the oppression of this group. Um, that's awful. But now I'm going to take steps to fix it because I know that it's a problem now. We don't just throw our hands up in the air and say, wow, this is terrible. I don't want to pay attention to it because it makes me sad. That's not something we do. And that's part of the reason we're great at making change. But we need to start bringing non-human animals into this realm of social justice because otherwise we're contradicting everything else we do, and we're not really upholding justice for all members of our society. Animals, they have voices. They're members of our society. Anyone who has gone wandering around in the middle of the night and accidentally stepped on a cat's tail knows that they feel pain, and anyone who has come home after a long day, and gets greeted by their dog knows that they can be happy, they can feel joy. Similarly, we've all seen an animal get scared from us and run away. We know that they feel all these emotions we do, and we know that they feel pain and that they feel happiness. So it's important to treat them not just with compassion or not just with kindness, because those words kind of suggest that we're going above and beyond. We need to treat them in a way that is just. And that means the minimum that a decent person can do, because that's really what social justice is. I mean, someone who is doing their best to not be racist is not necessarily a good person for not being racist. They're just not being a bad person. They're doing the minimum of what a decent person should be expected to do. So I think that based on all of this, it's time for all of us as social justice advocates to become anti-speciesists and to start fighting for non-human animals. Yeah, that's that's all I've got. Thank you for watching. If you've watched this far, I'm sure that we'll be in touch soon. Thanks. Bye.